Good afternoon and welcome to another exciting installment of the Moses Kotane virtual lecture series. I am Noktula Shongwe and I will be your host this afternoon. We'll be discussing the state of the cannabis business in South Africa. I am joined today by my esteemed colleague, Mr. Desmond Griever, who's a qualified pharmacist with a Bachelor of Pharmacy and an MBA, who has operated at a senior management level in both the national and multinational pharmaceutical manufacturing companies for over 20 years. He's run manufacturing facilities for the big international pharmaceutical companies, including the Janssen Pharmaceutica, which is a division of the Johnson & Johnson. He's also led the South Africa's Adcock Ingram Limited. Within Adcock, Mr. Griever led the upgrade of the existing pharmaceutical facilities of international GMP standards and led the design, construction, and commissioning of Adcock Ingram flagship. Mr. Griever has since 2019 led the design, construction, and licensing of several medical cannabis cultivation facilities in South Africa, and has in this time been contracted by MKI, where he leads the team charged with the acceleration of the commercialization of cannabis in KwaZulu-Natal. Within South Africa, Mr. Griever, within the South African industry, has developed strong working relationships with key licensed producers and is leading initiatives aimed at beneficiating and processing of both medical cannabis and industrial hemp. Desmond Griever also from time to time provides input into cannabis and hemp regulatory decisions within the South African context. Without further ado, I will now hand over to our industry expert, Mr. Desmond Griever. Take it away, Mr. Griever.
Good afternoon, Nakutula. Thank you very much for that generous introduction. Too kind. Yeah, as you said, Desmond is a pharmaceutical industry veteran charged with commercialization of cannabis with a strong team. And before we even start, I want to acknowledge the input of my team. I want to acknowledge our executive, Dr. Buthelezi, who has hair on her teeth, given the routes we sometimes and the issues we need to negotiate. And my capable colleagues, Notolo, who does much of the admin and legal work for us, and our agronomist Mr. Hamdu, who's also a very accomplished researcher and helps us in terms of documenting many of the technical issues we are faced with on a daily basis. Having sort of introduced the team, I'd just like to, without wasting time, get onto the content matter. This afternoon's talk, and it's not really a lecture, I wouldn't presume to be as accomplished as that. It's more a snapshot of the issues that the South African cannabis industry is delving with today. I'm just going to ask for all the participants, please. Cannabis is a heated topic. There are sure to be questions. I'm just going to ask if you can make a note of your questions or throw them onto the discussion box. We will allow sufficient time at the end of this presentation for questions, comments, and a little bit of interaction. So just in brief, I've tried to sort of segregate the discussion into the classical cannabis industries, clearly differentiating between medical cannabis, which is now well established in the country, and hemp, which is the next wave of activity and the next challenge for the industry as a whole. So, as I said, the purpose of this discussion is to just give a high-level strategic overview and status of what's happening in cannabis, with the emphasis on KZN, but you know, we have to look at the general South African context. The cannabis industry is pretty much in its infancy, and the interest and the problem that we're faced with is, you know, on the medical side, we've got a comprehensive regulatory framework. But with regards to the rest of the cannabis industry, which is probably the remaining 80%, the lack of regulation leads to much misinformation, leads to much prejudice, confusion, suspicion, and generally a lack of collaboration in the space. The lack of regulations has also caused a major constriction of significant investments which are sitting on the sidelines, waiting for a clearer regulatory environment before capital engages opportunity. Just a very quick legislative update. There's nothing new in this slide. Everybody in the industry is very much aware of the Government Gazette published on the 22nd of May last year. The Gazette is famous for this thing only in that it's deregulated hemp, descheduled hemp, put hemp aside as a prohibited substance in terms of the Medicines and Related Substances Control Act. Be that as it may, what the Gazette has further done, it has positioned CBD for medicinal use as Schedule 4, rightly so, and THC for medicinal use as Schedule 6 or 7, rightly so. However, it has created some space in that it has allowed uncontrolled use of CBD, specifically for personal care products and complementary medicines, subject to what we call in the industry the 20 milligram per day sub-rule. The regulation was fairly specific in that it was clear in its objective to exclude the use of CBD in foods, and I think the intent there is to allow Department of Agriculture to flesh out the provisions for CBD in food, and the control limits, and generally what is going to define hemp for the context of the rest of this discussion is hemp is anything with it, any cannabis plant with a THC limit not exceeding 0.2%. It is cold, it is dogmatic, it is analytical, but it at least gives clear guidelines for the industry in terms of where we want to go. Notwithstanding the publication of the Gazette last year, the Gazette made provision for the tabling of hemp regulations by the responsible department, meaning Department of Trade and Industry, Department of Agriculture. The practical implementation of this Gazette to date remains constrained, mainly because of the unchanged provisions of the Drug and Drug Trafficking Act. So where we sit today, we've got major opportunities in terms of commercial activity. There's major opportunities in hemp for industrial applications, fibers and biopolymers, hemp for foods, hemp for essential oils, hemp for a whole range of non-medicinal CBD applications. None of those opportunities can be fully commercially exploited until the offending regulation, in other words, the Drug and Drug Trafficking Act, is fully amended or revoked. And essentially what has happened is the industry has been in limbo, pretty much in a regulatory vacuum for the last 13 months. So in the last year as well, we had the publication of the Cannabis for or the Cannabis for Private Purposes Bill. This bill has been discussed widely. Its contents are widely known and understood. And our main objections to this bill really is, number one, hemp as an industry remains hostage until this bill is passed. For whatever reason, Department of Justice has took it upon itself to use the Hemp for Private Purposes Bill as the mechanism through which to amend the Drug and Drug Trafficking Act. The long and the short of where we stand is that there is much objection to the Cannabis for Private Purposes Bill. It is our view, or my view specifically, that that bill is unlikely to pass in its current form, and that is going to, of necessity, result in a delay of the amendment of the Drug and Drug Trafficking Act. So the only light really that has come across our path is in the last month. The Honourable Minister of Agriculture, Minister Didiza, made a public statement and went on record that the department would commence the issue of hemp regulations or permitting systems by October 2021. How this is going to be achieved with the Drug and Drug Trafficking Act still on the books, this will remain to be seen. The net result of this confusion in the hemp space was a press release last week, where a South African-based CBD personal care company, Greenleaf Products, and they're all over the internet, announced a 650 million rand acquisition of 35% of Highlands Investments, which used to be Canopy Growth Lesotho. The sad thing is that what comes out of this transaction is that a 650 million rand in CBD consumer products, which will be bought by South Africans, which will sit on South African shelves, will consume CBD cultivated in Lesotho. Yet we've got a number of South African operations sitting with high CBD hemp that unfortunately is facing rot, is facing loss, is facing destruction by reason of an unclear route to market. Be that as may, not everything is as bleak as it seems. Medical cannabis has been the jewel in the South African crown. There is a good story to write. You know, while companies have not been able to access traditional business finance without medical cannabis licenses, this has excluded large sections of the community. But in the main, companies, organizations, structures with the ability to raise the seed capital have been able to take risks, make the investments, and successfully navigate the course or the path towards licensing. Where we sit, and I believe these numbers are dated but anyway, where we sit on SAHPRA's website was 22 license issues nationally. I believe the number is more, and it will double by the end of this year. the number of applications in the system, I understand, exceed a few hundred. Having said that, as MKI, we faced on a daily basis with assisting, engaging with cannabis entrepreneurs seeking to access funding. And there's a couple of things that I need to point out to entrepreneurs joining us on the platform, is that success in medical cannabis is like success in any business. It's about putting together a solid entrepreneurial team with a clear vision, and the vision unfortunately needs to extend beyond just cultivation. It's about exposure, and wherever possible, collaboration must be established with either local or international cannabis businesses in order to achieve early access to market, early access to technology, or early access to collaboration opportunities. And you know, this is the hard lesson that's been learned in cannabis over the last 13 months. You know, the rule in this business is collaborate or die. There's a bit of a silo mentality where businesses, and understandingly so, I mean, businesses are forking between 5 million and 30 million rand to access those licenses, and they tend to adopt a closed lager mentality. But the fact of the matter is we need to collaborate across the industry to create routes to markets, to create information portals and information sharing platforms to make it easier for organized groups to access the space. I believe strongly that cannabis, our competition is not amongst South African cannabis growers. Cannabis is a global commodity, and South Africa needs to think, act, and collaborate in order to compete as a bloc. Just sort of one final comment, and this is more to the medical community. And I don't know if we have medical representation on this meeting, but a single issue in South Africa, and it's going to remain an issue regardless of whether or not we see recreational legislation, is that our medical community is just not taking up medical cannabis. And right now there's a desperate need for the country to mobilize the medical community and get medical cannabis written up on scripts and get medical cannabis into retail pharmacies. And this is a real alternative to orthodox medicines. This is not about generating demand. This is not about marketing. And this is not about the latest fad. I come from a background where I spent many years of my life pumping tons of opiate into the South African population. And cannabis is a real solution for anxiety, for mental diseases, for epilepsy, for a whole range of cancer conditions, pain management, depression, you name it. And until we have a drive by our medical schools, our CPD, our continuing professional development organizations, we're not going to see the offtake the local industry needs. And, you know, the local industry, first and foremost, yes, it's about operating as a block to generate revenue streams and taxes for the country. But we gotta get our professional healthcare establishment in the race as well. I don't need to buy a Schedule 7 synthetic THC packaged by Pfizer, where I can get licensed product cultivated in Joburg or Durban for a fraction of the cost. Just a final note on medical cannabis, and I'm sorry to drag on about it, but it's been the heart of the industry for the last 14, 15 months. Right now, there's a global arms race on to capture Europe. And in terms of the South African medical cannabis industry, there needs to be a concerted effort at getting the industry to operate in unison, precisely to overcome the regulatory hurdles that are being imposed upon the rest of the world by the European Union. At this stage, I got to take my hats off to my colleagues at SAPRA. The first 18 months of this business were tough in terms of getting sites GMP ready and GMP approved. But the recent 2-3 months, we've seen the publication and issuance of GMP equivalent certificates, and that went a long way to silencing the noise and the demand from Europe in terms of proving our equivalence and capabilities. Having said that, the industry needs to, through the industry body, look at putting together direct representation for South Africa in terms of arguing EU GMP status of our facilities, many of which will compete with the best in Europe as they currently stand. I'm going to broaden the scope of the discussion now. Let's leave medical cannabis alone. We'll pick up on it in the question section. I just want to have a very quick run through hemp. I believed, and as a unit, we've believed that hemp is perhaps been marginalized as the industry driver. Medical cannabis is the tail that wags the dog. The growth engine in terms of jobs, in terms of revenue, in terms of economic development for the KZN province and the country as a whole is going to be the hemp side of the cannabis plant. In terms of hemp, there's a number of initiatives on the go in the province. And these are, but also just a reflection of what's happening in various centers across the country. The first area that we need to look at is genetics. Yes, South Africa right now is heavily dependent on import genetics. Imported genetics on the medical cannabis side perhaps is understandable, and it's justified. Given the demand on the cannabinoid process by the specific medical preparations. However, when it comes to the deployment of cannabis for hemp, there's big scope for development of South African specific strains. We're aware of a number of projects that we support both technically and just by hand holding and giving advice where we can. And on the screen now is a typical example. This is a local development with Durban poison, famous strain, crossed with Charlotte's Angel. That's a F3 phenotype. And yeah, what you're looking at now is Durban Angel, South Africa's own equivalent of Charlotte's Angel. This is just the creativity and dogged stubbornness of a cannabis breeder trying to establish a position in the industry on which to operate going forward. Hopefully the pending regulatory changes will place typically an entrepreneur of this sort in a position to benefit from the work that they've invested in over the last year, 2-3 years, God knows how long. But we need to allow these entrepreneurs the opportunity to register their genetics. I mean, they need to claim plant breeders' rights and get some kind of reward for the effort they've put in. Seedling propagation, this is a burning issue within the MKI cannabis microenvironment at the moment. There's some work being done with nurseries in terms of hardening and developing specifically hemp strains. And the targets of these strains is that by October, at least there's a platform for the rapid propagation and exploitation of commercial opportunities that are opened up by the licensing or regulatory environment. The flagship of our hemp activities in the KZN province, and I think at the heartbeat of every South African really, is this Winterton facility. A lot of work was done last year in terms of completing due diligence. This was done in conjunction, collaboration with our colleagues at the CSIR. This work has now progressed to the point where there's significant investment from outside investors, some mix of local capital and international capital. Provided we are able to overcome the due diligence hurdles that lay ahead of the buying organization, we're confident that we were able to get this facility funded and operational. The big promise, the big excitement is on a single shift, this facility will consume 1,200 hectares worth of industrial hemp, and conversations on the go in terms of organizing outgrowers and the necessary support platforms to get smallholder growers into the value chain so that we can have primary agricultural sort of inputs benefiting the local communities, the local smallholder farmers, and the offtake driver being this facility, providing the technical support, providing the mechanization, providing some of the thought leadership. Also, there's been heavily involvement here, and I must stop and give, what's the word, credit to our KZN Department of Agriculture. We've had tremendous support in terms of reviewing the initiative, helping us design some sort of broad scope for production, and just generally supporting the initiative and being willing to move the project forward. So we pray and we work, and we hope we'll see this closed out fairly soon. The pictures you see below you were taken last week. This is a facility in Durban itself. This is for, you know, I just mentioned earlier that we saw last week a major CBD oil transaction, or CBD oil based transaction, going to Lesotho Grows. What is demonstrated here is a South African manufactured supercritical extraction machine in production. And just to place the regulators at ease, this machine here is extracting hops and not cannabis. But the point of the matter is, you know, I'm going to pause this now. The point I was trying to make is, you know, supercritical CO2 extraction up until a few months ago was positioned as this big, difficult, expensive exercise restricted to the domain of Canadian, American, and one or two well-funded South African organizations. Today, South Africa is manufacturing its own CO2 supercritical equipment. So in terms of the KZN itself, there are facilities that are positioned as hubs for the generation of oil, specifically under the provisions for further use in personal care. Obviously, this is not a EU or a SA GMP type facility. It's more aligned to personal care production and hazard. Opportunities that remain, I must say, look, there's been a big push in the Western Cape with Afriplex, and in Gauteng with a number of organizations that are building specific capabilities around the cannabis market. But be that as it may, we've had the opportunity of working with 1 or 2 KZN SANAS accredited labs over the past couple of months. And yeah, the labs are getting to grips with cannabis. And even though it's simple HPLC technology, you know, there is an acceptance, there is a growing acceptance and understanding of the plant and release criteria that are applied. The next big area, and the area that has to receive focus over the next 8 to 12 months, has to be venture capital and venture capital funding. The problem with medical cannabis, again, is that banks only, our commercial banks will only get involved post-licensing, which leaves the licensing phase, in other words, the build phase of the project, very much open to angel finance, venture capital finance, or a donor organization finance. So there's a strong need for, you know, VC platforms to take new cannabis businesses from zero to license. You know, as I said, once an organization has a license and a half decent offtake, we at a position now, which is much better than where we were last year this time, where the big banks are jumping in to provide trade finance, expansion finance, and the rest. So there needs to be more work done in terms of developing VC funds. And I acknowledge Baobab and the work that they've done. We've had some interesting discussions with ACA Capital. There's discussions that have been opened up with 1 or more organizations specifically targeted at taking entrepreneurs from zero to license. There's growing opportunities in transaction and advisory services. For now, I will not dig into that. But where I see a massive opportunity right now is the development of some sort of South African Cannabis Exchange for the vetting, the grading, the pricing, and back-end transacting. Because what we're finding is that yeah, businesses have offtake, and what happens is, for whatever reason, let's say a crop comes out at less than a 16% specification, we have businesses sitting with crop that they cannot move, and rather than that crop finding its way into the illicit market or the farmer picking up unnecessary losses, we understand that this market is big. And we understand that what needs to happen is there needs to be some sort of transparency into introducing new buyers into the market, or introducing producers to the buyers. And you know, I do believe that a lot of product that is currently unsaleable by reason of a deviation from specification, or a deviation from, or a contract folding for whatever reason on the buyer's side, can be rerouted. I mean, it's just a question of vetting, legitimacy of buyer, legitimacy of seller, pricing, and then having the back end transacting done. So, you know, there's a call for that. There's an opportunity in that space, and the whole idea here is about it's about credibility, because it always remains a three-way transaction. It's the buyer, it's the seller, and on both countries, there's regulatory authorities that need to shake hands as well. I cannot discuss cannabis in KZN without having a look at Lebourdain. I think, you know, whatever we do in the industry will always come back to the want to achieve a zero waste model. And Again, if you look at cannabis, including hemp as a holistic ecosystem, the opportunities are summarized nicely on this farm with seed propagation, cultivation, the production of flour and hemp oil, the production of biodiesel, the production of hempcrete using fiber, the production of animal feed from the hemp, and it's gone as far as, believe it or not, hemp flour. So that was a shocker, and that was a very interesting experience. But the farm represents on a microcosm, sort of a cross-section of the capabilities of the plant, and each one of those streams is a value driver at a macro level. Every one of those literally is an industry. Very quickly, I'm running out of time, just to speak to risks. The most significant risk to the hemp industry and all its potential right now, and I'm sorry for hammering on about this, is that we have no regulatory framework for the cultivation or processing of hemp. The world is not standing by and waiting for South Africa to join. And I don't want to create FOMO, but with a 30% plus unemployment rate, and with capital sitting on the sidelines, there's a clear and pressing argument to say, you know what, give us the framework and allow for the industry to find its legs and generate on its own steam the economic increases we are trying to see. You know, the other risks are really legal, technical, but you know, the long and the short of what keeps everybody in the cannabis hemp space awake at night is lack of agricultural regulations. Investment priorities, very quickly, medical cannabis, and I've made it clear that we need to see activity in the 0 to license space. That's where the biggest need is. There's been significant relief now with licensed operators getting support from ABSA, Nedbank, and the like. The pictures here again, this is they've now renamed themselves Opulence Pharmaceuticals, but this is Bishop Govender's site in Verulam, fully licensed, and I think a jewel in the KZN crown. Industrial hemp for fiber, I've been through the case for Winterton. And just to say that, you know, the knock-on effect of hemp fiber production has tremendous knock-on implications for the paper industry, bioplastics as an industry that will be built from scratch, building materials and food. You know, I've spoke briefly about the SFS Winterton facility, and we've noted over the last 2-3 months that there is a growing interest in terms of looking at pure hemp in the, for fiber projects, and there's at least 2 more projects that are starting to gain shape. Very quickly, an opportunity for smaller farmers remains hemp for oils or hemp oil. Distinct advantages to hemp oil is that the businesses are profitable on a smaller scale as opposed to hemp for fiber. The businesses are based on basic agricultural and food handling disciplines. There's very little to these businesses that are new. Yes, cannabis is unique, but agriculture practice and discipline is pretty much the same. Free from medicines compliance regulations, because this is targeted at the personal care space. And there's a huge range of market applications providing international demand for quality crops. I mean, your entire market is driven by the American consumer at the moment, everything from dog food to bath soap. And And that demand is real. It is hungry. It needs to be fed. And the only thing keeping our people from feeding the demand is license, permit, not license, but rather let me say permit or hemp regulations that will entitle them to cultivate without fear of raids or harassment. I'm not going to dwell too much on seedlings. I'm just going to read that comment in red, which says that should the cannabis bill, the draft cannabis for private purposes bill, come into law, there's nothing in the proposed legislation that prevents the further propagation of imported or local hemp strains. In other words, there's no constraints on seedlings. That being the case, we are still restricted in terms of preparing genetic material because, yeah, the Drug and Drug Trafficking Act still calls it DAGA. So just to say, in terms of training, the MKI has published over the last month a call for the design of an incubator. And that comes from a place where we realize that there's a lot of training that needs to happen in the medical cannabis space, and that's not about the cultivation of cannabis, but it's about tooling entrepreneurs up to present and defend business plans. Hemp for CBD, there's a lot of work to be done once we get the freedom to operate in terms of optimizing crops for performance, because really hemp is about the quality of the bud. And then hemp for fiber, that's high volume, mass scale, mechanical agriculture. And that is going to need a lot of empowerment work that will be driven by Department of Agriculture as a offtake driven initiative with the fiber production facility. That in a nutshell, ladies and gentlemen, is sort of a summary, conclusion of my presentation. And I don't know, I see we have 41 attendees. I need to thank you all for your time. And I'll just allow whatever time remains for questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Griever. Let's just check. It seems we do have a question. Oh, we had a question. It seems it's disappeared. We had a question regarding whether the okay, this question is no longer on the chat, but there was a question regarding the licensing, whether there were still are the existing hemp R&D permits still valid until the new ones begin in October. If you could just unmute yourself.
My apologies. I would argue yes, those permits are still valid. There is no way of changing those dates, and in the absence of the new regulations, there has been, at least from law enforcement's perspective, a willingness to accept the validity.
All right, I hope that answers that one. Maybe just another question. You spoke about the regulations being a hindrance, in that there are no regulations at this point. Are there plans to complete those regulations? What are the plans for the regulatory framework?
All that I can say is that the Department of Agriculture has given a very clear commitment that we would have regulations published by October this year. What exactly the shape, form, or structure will be, no insight, no visibility. Nobody knows.
All right. Thank you. It seems like we have no other questions in the chat. So with that being said, we would like to close this afternoon session. We will post the session on our YouTube channel. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube to get all the updates and all interesting information in other economic development research fields as well. Thank you so much for tuning in. Until next time. Thank you.
Thank you.